Hello and welcome to another modelling video.
Oh wow, I'm really grateful that this did not make it to air, and man, I've come a long way. This is Alan from the Mokanaman at YouTube, and I've been on this platform for over 10 years and modelling for even longer than that. Picking up a video camera and approaching a friend for editing and advice, who has recently come to the platform himself. I was in my early 20s and very naive to what the internet had to offer and any form of content creation, audience retention, or any way of making engaging videos and models in itself. It was a different wild time, and the platform was all about broadcasting yourself or having an idea and making content. Going along as I was learning, I've made a lot of bad models, and I made some terrible videos that have uploaded. Though, did you know I've got an entire collection of folders, raw footage and concepts that was so bad they were never uploaded and considered absolute failures. And as failed compilations are a thing, and it's a bit of a sin for a modeler or artist to admit to fault, bad work or whatnot, I'm prepared to bear all and share it with you guys. Facebook won't let you believe this, but we all have to learn and grow from somewhere, and we all make mistakes. Some of these entries will be a laugh, some of them will be worthwhile learning from. At the start, 2010, first year of content, I was enjoying the beta release of Minecraft and felt the urge to do some balsa wood scratch building. With no merchandise on the market back then, which is hard to believe, I cut out some basic geometric shapes, glued it all together. This never left the primer stage, and I lost interest in achieving digital camouflage. Minecraft YouTube content was trending at the time. In effort to make some unique tutorials, I was working on a decal repairing video where water slide decals would dissolve in water. I suggested applying a clear coat or multiples to thicken it up and make it strong enough to transfer to the model. If it yellowed, advice I read in a fine scale modeler was to tape it to a window and allow UV to bleach it a bit. It just disintegrated and fell apart in water. Crazy idea from work. I'd apply masking tape on paper, hole punch it or use other creative cut punches, collect it and apply. The masking would just stick to the paper and failed. Thinking now, I should readdress this with baking paper. Later part of the year, at a Manifest Anime Con event, we'll talk about the Mecha Workshop Model Club I was a member of. I was given this figure as my first sponsorship video of a guy developing his own tabletop game and line of miniatures, or something that he was importing at least. With this figure I was going to paint it up and make a video about it to share around on social media. It was a very cute anime-esque character in theme to the event. It never surpassed the priming stage, unfortunately. 2011. Hello and welcome to another modelling video. This is going to be my newest project. A little trophy on my wall. Memento. So I'm going to be mashing together two first grade blue frames, a gashapon. This was meant to be for the manifest where the giveaway was a heap of blue frames, but that's changed since. Got some sort of hazel going on here. So I'm thinking of using the torso, probably the RX-78 arms, something like a tiny head, two small arms and four big arms, and a half-scale Gundam for extra pieces to fill in from the gashapon eye. I've also chopped up the leg, so I'm going to start adding the articulation elements in there. Of the soft vinyl shield, reinforced because it's so soft and floppy. It's reinforced with a bit of styrofoam from the old RX-78 shield, and you got the peg to stick on the arm and some putty. A gun cannon gun arm and the shoulder from the hazel. Main torso. Now you're probably wondering how I stick magnets in my kits. When I got a little hole like there, I fill it with putty and make it flat. and put some glue on it and just sink a magnet in there until it's of a flat level. Then afterwards, once it's fully dries, I put another magnet or two magnets on top of that magnet, fill the other half with putty, put a dab of glue on top of the putty and sandwich it on top of that and release. And the magnet should be flat into this piece, and then I put a very thin layer on top of the magnet with glue. Once both sides dries and I sand it back a bit, you should have a very strong connection. Got the torso of the half scale kit, and I'm chopping up the vinyl one. I'm going to glue bits of detail onto that. The head is already decorated. That's looking pretty sweet. So we can... Whoops, wrong way. So we're going to have articulation. I've done quite a bit of work with that suitable update. We've got the feet. It's all magnetized. And the body is a mixture of an RX-78 and a Hazel. And we can get to see the double set of arms. Everything is pretty much in one piece now. This is the shape that I want. Unfortunately, I only have about 4 more days to finish this, which I still have to fill seam lines and give him the old cleanup. This has completely skipped my memory, and I can understand why I've completely abandoned and shunned this project, though it was a major experimental and first for... The camouflage is done. It's looking quite good, quite dark. I probably also did a shit job building him. All that's left to do is some touch-ups. Got these colours lined up. And some decals. The channel content creating for longer form videos of a more complex and explanatory video on the thought process of experimenting and combining a bunch of different techniques, methods, magnets, painting, and fusing toys into model kits to make something more grandiose and akin to all the inspirational compilation videos I saw from the Gunpla Builders World Cup. Instead of doing a giant monolithic, overly cladded, overly detailed robot, I thought utilising small gashapons and on a couple of very small cheap kits I'd be able to achieve the same thing. And even though I managed to display this at the event I attended and painted it up, and it was pretty cool and liked, the footage was very wobbly, dark, and just not suitable for uploading and long-term archival or showcase. The model was also eventually lost to time. This was a great experience and learning curve. I have some stuff from Series 1, and I bought some stuff and Series 2, and I've got a single Series 3 one from Japan, but those is eBay. They appear on eBay at an okay price, so I might just... At said anime event with friends, we'll allocated space to run our club workshop and promote the hobby. It started off as a Zoids workshop, as was the animation appearing at the time, and the guys originally running it was mostly into that before Gundam hit quite heavily. I was able to buy a few kits off them secondhand and source them around, being a fan myself. I did build this Gun Tiger, though beyond filming the unboxing process there's no other footage that can be found. I did a partial paint job with chipping and shading and paused it doing the decals. The model has also been lost to time. The great aspect of socialising and being at these events was I was able to get quite a bit of modelling done and a lot of inspiration and tips. As explored in my Lost Content video, YouTube in 2010s was a wild place. Most decent content was in Japanese or no commentary with a audio music backing track. This is an example of one of the videos I attempted to make on a tutorial masking and testing a variety of different products, being modelling found around the household and industrial. I was very naive and my skills were not as polished. As this session, sitting down and filming to re-look and review what I've produced, I've learnt quite a bit and attempted it on my models a few times, but felt the tests here were not worth sharing, though looking back there was definitely some other interesting ideas and I should have shared as an experiment. Edges that were too rough, too much paint being applied, raised issues with tape to a soft edge with blue tack, the different drying times and edges with RC or Mr. Hobby latex mask. It was all very interesting. You will definitely recognise some of these products as I wasn't able to review them until many years later to last year, where I had the confidence to display it on a model and showcase its correct use. And then overall masking video is definitely in the works right now and shall be uploaded much later 2022. Masking is an easy skill, but it can be tricky depending on the shapes and context. Some of the examples were not ideal. And it takes a lot of patience and many hours of practice before you're able to showcase something, which I haven't at the time.
But it's really
The
not
next
noticeable.
kit that was
Okay,
lost
you
to
do have a
time
point.
is the Chameleon Zoid Megaleon. This was built purely for its playability and gimmicks, the tongues moving out, the back opening up in a transforming state, partially transparent plastic, and the base part I utilized for a pre-shading tutorial way back in the piece. I started documenting it to make a video reviewing and building this. Decals was meant to be sourced. It was put aside for a very long time, and as age progressed I looked at it and felt that it wasn't quite worth building or finishing off. I think it was either sold, gifted, or moved on after the piece. It was very cool, definitely worth keeping in its collectible form. My footage stops at it being primed. I regret not finishing it and losing it. It's really cool. Between attending and hosting events, hobby clubs, making friends, we would gather and go to various places, and one is a very special location
It's good because I finally got off my bum and started working on my Gira Zulu.
the cornerstone of the Melbourne hobby scene back then, and where I used to shop as a child to starting off at work, the Victorian Hobby Center, located on the old Swanson Street, Melbourne, Australia. My original memory of the 90s was a dimly lit location, the same site with 3 sections segmented, many shelves of dusty old and newly released kits with this musky carpet. The first section all railway, and the far end second-hand goods and glass cabinets full of trophies and amazingly built older models. The counter down the right hand side would be full of tools, aftermarket parts and decals, where these elderly gentlemen would be constantly fighting, talking politics, but very happy to pause and help with whatever issue or offer customer service. It would be discussions anywhere from military vehicles used by the Australian government all the way to overseas conflicts. After closing, we're invited for a drink and a private shop.
No, doesn't want to. Just refuses to.
What have you done to that shit?
That's not one of ours anyway.
Yeah, it is. I got it from you
Oh yeah.
about 7 years ago.
Sorry, it's past the warranty period.
Could you put Misty on it?
No, it's too fat.
My first and main hobby workspace plus studio was the family art studio at my mother's house, and even though I would work and travel, I would always come back of a weekend or for a little time to do building. I returned home many a times to live until I eventually purchased my own joint and run a studio. We've always had a pet at the family home, and it was always a studio cat that would hang out and appear in photos, footage, and interact as me, mum, or anyone was working in the studio. Sometimes classes would resume and there would be several people coming in and out in a commercial setting. YouTube is definitely the home of animal and cat content, though I always restrain myself from uploading such content, though they do appear in vlogs and work in progresses. I've also been extremely lucky and grateful that the family has been very supportive in my content creating pursuits, and would definitely like to mention that at some point, which is appropriate now. Now, to go completely off topic, my first personal pet was a crayfish, and I found him in the Chinatown of Melbourne's CBD walking down the street. And this connects to my hobby friends, as I cut open a bottle of water with a knife and decided to take him home as he was walking down the street. It's a very fascinating and lovable pet. With all those rocks, he would build all sorts of structures and climb around the place. Love the guy.
Hello and welcome to another modelling video. This is Alan from Mokanaman at YouTube.
This is one of my biggest historical personal shames, even though it's nothing to be ashamed of. I ruined the scheme being overly ambitious in doing a candy effect and applying too many paints, too many experiments, too much going on.
It has a very interesting colour scheme of a shiny magenta and a frosted, matted or silky gold, and we'll do a tutorial on candy coating kits. The pieces in question are mounted and ready for painting. I'm going to hit it with a normal primer and do any buffing or fixing of imperfections. Black top coat, which would be of a glossy nature, normally in enamel or lacquer, then a metallic paint. I will be using Alclad bright silver base for candy effects, but in past people have been using polished aluminium. I'll also be using the Revell Enamel Clear and the Alclad range of clear paints to mix a magenta.
By the sounds of it, I had all the theory down pat, but not quite aware of sandpaper and buffing down to a micro level, fully using micro filler primers. Obviously not quite aware yet that you can't mix clear colours, which will explain why later. Interesting on the historical mindset. Before ultra gloss or base black, everyone was using enamels back then.
The primer has a micro-filling ability, meaning that it has thick fibres that will fill fine scratches and mistakes. Everything is beautifully primed. I'd like to use a non-shrinking putty. I think Squadron's a good choice. Smear it across the seam. After the seam lines have been filled and primed, about 2 times over.
This is fairly awkward to work with. The audio is super choppy. I'm doing a ton of editing and the footage is a bit distorted due to an older type that has to be stretched out. I'm spending a lot of time on this.
All the pieces have been undercoated gloss black. As you can see, they're extremely shiny.
100% unwatchable in its raw form, and to think I would be putting this through Windows Movie Maker, I don't even know how I've achieved any of this. Post commentary is so much easier, though if I had to film my voice, I'd rather do a few takes to edit as little as possible and spend more time modelling.
The shiniest range to Alclad is the chrome. I believe sometimes it is a bit too harsh in scale, normally like the polished aluminium.
Oi, Alan, consistency. What happened to the new bright base? I don't know what you're doing, buddy. Nice finish regardless. I'm pretty happy with this.
But that's what happens if you have a seam line, nub mark, whatever. It will show out really, really horribly. And that will require buffing out and redoing the whole thing all over again. This is an example of the Alclad blue applied. Now I would like to go for a magenta effect, and applying just clear red is only going to give me a clear red. Mixing clear colours is a bad idea, as you'll get disastrous results, but laying them on top of each other can get a palette of a much larger variety of colours. But don't forget that with clears you have to put as thin as a coat as possible, as the heavier you build up, the less metallic shine goes through and the less candy effect you get to just a really, really gloss coat.
Okay, I remember what happened here. Instead of mixing colours, which would give you a weird brown or all sorts of disgusting monstrosities, I built up multiple layers, and thinking it was all enamel, it was going to be okay. The Alclad is a special mix of whatever it is. I applied this blue, then I put the Revell red over it for that magenta look, and it just revoltingly and horribly cracked up like Crackle Medium and started to flake off. This upset me quite a bit, and the build was abandoned at that point to be repainted this year. Very rambly. I don't know why I was trying to achieve a 20-minute candy video. This time around I'm playing with Crackle Medium, and this is an example from my mum's studio, and I reached for Vallejo branded Crackle Medium for acrylics. Using the base for the Air Fury Baghdad version, I brushed it across in an uneven fashion and pretty much airbrush the top coat. The model initially did not break up and sat static, and eventually it started to grow and flake, and for many years the cracks were there and it had the same look as the original example. After 5-6 years the paint just started flaking off and it was completely bare back to the base coat, which is only a very temporary effect, and the video was never finished.
Hello and welcome to another modelling video. I do regret and apologise that this isn't going to be related to a tutorial or a build that I'm currently working on.
Before I decided to finalise the type of YouTuber I was going to be and set out a persona and rule set of content being put out, I definitely flirted with many different ideas, being younger. Definitely wanted to reach out and get attention, grow rapidly, all that sort of thing, and flirted with being a drama channel, commentary, and touching on the more controversial aspects of the hobby, which I did very early on in the bootleg debate. Some stuff I do when I feel a bit spicy and want to be playful.
PhD man,
I go onto my secondary YouTube channel and have some fun, but that's very rare. Let's have a little listen in.
First I want to start off as I'd like this video to be a general-ish disclaimer. Even though I may be labelled by other people as something like a professional or whatever, it's very humbling, and I do like it. It's food for the ego. But I'm far from being a professional. I choose not to label myself as that, as I don't make any money off this hobby.
Oh man, this is stupid. Full of ego, also full of shit, I guess. I make money now, and there's nothing wrong with commissions, monetizing stuff, whatnot. There's a bit of shame at the moment, but back then the monetization program was not in full swing, and there was very few elite commission modelers at the time.
But most importantly, I do not do commissions. I don't feel my skill set and repertoire or style is appropriate for Chinfu, DC23. I've seen them either sell off their existing work or do commissions, and sometimes they get very picky people and they have to redo things and sandbag paintwork and whatnot, and if I believe something's good enough and they don't want it, that would irritate the hell out of me.
Showing a lot of insecurities, is probably getting quite a bit of flack. Criticism is never easy to take, especially trolling.
A lot of people will say there is no incorrect way around how you build and finish your model.
Over the years it has taken a while to realise it's a very ruthless hobby that requires you to conform in being a part of a community or a popular sect. I still definitely enjoy doing stuff my own way.
Is your safety and health stuff, things like your carcinogenics, your sanding resins, your anything that's out of a rattle can is definitely a carcinogenic. Anything that's not acrylic is going to affect your lungs. Anything with a sharp edge is going to pierce flesh. Anything with a motor has, potential of disaster. Flammable goods and you're playing with fire, another thing. These are things that you definitely do think about, and if, let's say, a technique video has a warning attached to it, you follow that no matter what.
This is a no thrills, rambly disclaimer video with a lot of unnecessary fluff and extra garbage thrown in. A lot of safety does go without saying, and it's fairly important. The audience retention that my channel attracts are mostly mature people from various parts of the world. If there's a hazard, it needs to be mentioned there and then. We definitely deal with chemicals. Things are airborne. Younger and teenage people enter and mimic and try to do these things. We should definitely pass on information. I think I'm trying to deflect all that and responsibility in this long-winded video, but it's disconnected, and a thing on safety and etiquette is definitely not going to be watched, and the idea that's been put aside and the video that's trashed is a very good idea that I never uploaded it, but it's still a trash fire to watch now.
And you also have to look at what gives the individual credibility as a tutorial maker.
100%. I definitely have none of that. Where things have been pride taken back then, and definitely now with clearer content, high definition, methods, techniques are demonstrated, filmed, presented in the video with the hearsay, and then there's work followed up in review videos of the models built, showcasing the method and technique working.
Another thing that's also very wrong to do, unless you have reasons or short on time.
This is definitely getting uncomfortable to face now. Very, very smug. All really long-winded example of dramas of tutorials comparing each other, fights among the comment section, and how my methods and tutorials different to others, and what's a correct style or not. These are opinions I no longer hold for a very long period of time, and this is definitely a very stupid video. 20 minutes long too. On an unrelated topic, I just focus on modelling and work, content creation. I've long been removed from the Gunpla community and just don't really interact with greater modelling communities, definitely on social media. It's more about interpersonal dramas than anything else, and it's just best to showcase your work, talk about the work, but spend more time at your bench and living life than behind a screen. Now that is good advice. I swear I've purchased these more recently, though I've got an entire fleet of Spartan Games Dystopian War Blazing Sun miniatures. They are waterline resin battleships that sort of depicts steam, diesel punk, World War II, World War I-esque vessels. I've got all these different battleships to destroy, these strange squids, land creatures, all that. Very cheap. They're beautifully sculpted, and we'll paint and finish them one day on this channel.
I like this in relation to Berserk Fury. It's got...
Empty one. What the hell am I opening an empty one?
Version
There is no white one. They just come in lavender.
I know.
Skipping to 2012 at the Manifest with a gathering of Mecha Workshop and the workshop for the attendees to enjoy, build and all that. I worked on a acrylic hand painting tutorial using Vallejo polyurethanes thinned with water. The trick with that is you just need a little surface tension breaker with detergent or something else. This video seems to be pretty good. A little editing is required. The model came out quite nice. I'm not too sure why I never finished and displayed this on the channel. Maybe I had other things going on or a more ambitious build, but it looks okay, just unfinished. Thin your paints, layer them in coats, allow time to dry. This is a test for Sprue Goo. I document everything, if it's going to be a video or not, in 5 photos. Test is thick cement, chopped up runners, put it in the jar and let it to melt and become one over a period of a few days. Used it to fill a seam line, soften the plastic. I found it to take far too long to dry in 2 to 3 days. Slightly rubbery in chipping and sanding. Not my preferred method of seam line filling or any sort of modelling work. Previously mentioned, I did say I enjoy and inspired by steampunk, diesel punk, cogs and all those mechanical elements, and dismantled quite a few broken watches given to me by friends and family, plus importing quite a few interesting photo etch and watch parts overseas, particularly Russia. Worked on a video where I dismantled a few watches and appropriated them in models, and some of the parts I got for more elaborate projects, storing them all away, but it didn't seem to be that interesting of a concept, sorting and storing parts, and I haven't glued them to models yet.
Long job. And when you start writing, they don't give you a job description. No, you just think, yeah, I'm going to be sitting down at my computer, I'm going to be writing these stories, which will go out there.
Following on the whole steampunk theme, I attended a pop culture convention and they did a discussion panel via a author on the steampunk genre and creating art, settings and stories around it. The majority of it was about how to write novels and focused on settings, the functionality, the world, the universe building and what a post-industrial revolution looks like, and it pretty much is focused on the study of geopolitics, culture and all of that in world building, and from that world building you build your story, and from that story you finally put in the props, if that's machinery, mecha, characters, and the appearance is the very last, which is funnily enough what I'm interested in most. Not 100% relevant, but seeing the bigger picture from afar was fairly helpful and interesting. I haven't really touched on the genre in a long time.
Kitty! There's my papa! Oh, I got... Kitty! There's my papa!
Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Silver Wolf Crystal and part of the member of the Mecha Workshop Club.
Could you tell me about this build? What kit is it and what did you do to it?
Yeah, it wasn't long ago till I became a Saku 2 fan. I really enjoyed the builds, and especially the 2.0, even though some members of the club may push me to go to the original old kits, which I am thinking about recently. But I saw quite a few of these. I tried to grab every single one I could, and I found a problem with too many of them were the same color, even though they were different.
Could you tell me about the process painting this kit?
Well, the first thing I do is wash the parts. I put it in the sink and use the detergents, and then I would either use primer or I would go ahead and just use the paints. Not an idea.
You're a rattle can painter, is that correct?
Yes, I am, unfortunately, but...
No, nothing unfortunately about it, it's your style.
I'm thinking about upgrading though to airbrushing, which is, people push me into it, and I think, well, if I can really get into it, control the paint, then I'll probably, upgrade to airbrushing, which would probably benefit more.
I generally really like the finish of it. I think you used Tamir lacquer spray cans, is that correct?
You are correct there.
The masking is very neat. I don't see any...
The Melbourne Mecha Workshop is a hobby club based in Melbourne, Australia, and was originally attached to the Manifest organising committee and events, eventually meeting a few times to monthly in their offices and moving to a men's shed in the western suburbs. I was made first aware around 2009 and documented their existence, though they claim the original administrators started way back in the early 2000s. In later years, I would become the administrator.
Send it off. It still looks discolored. It's like it's mocking me for not painting.
Then forcefully removed by 2019 by majority decision of the group. It has seen many highs and travels, events, plus a few issues and incidences as any organisation and group would go through. It rapidly declined afterwards.
So Mike, tell me about these kits.
I did enjoy my time and learnt many life lessons and skills more or less in events and content creation, model making. A lot of the members made some amazing pieces that I'd love to share, and thought that a segment of interviewing the members and showcasing their works would really get their name out there. Their concept never really took off as many activities and attentions were required during club meets and displays. I did review many of the shows and events we attended on the main channel.
Alone. Now I got weapons.
Oh, there's still more to go.
Can you
Yep.
okay in New Zealand?
You haven't got the cannon.
To date of filming, Australia no longer has a combined or fractured Gunpla community. The large Melbourne scene and the entirety of the Australian collective eventually formed around the wholesaler and Gundam distributor Hobby Co in Sydney, which attracted the attention of Japan and Bandai and hosted the Gunpla Builders World Cup shortly after 2011-12. The first group was formed called Gundam Australia, which was hosted off the Evil Cow forums. It was very small, where I met a modeler named Wolfman, who was one of the founding members of the community and first publicly known modelers that would post their work online. Footage contains this gentleman visiting me and producing some work in the studio before an event. Afterwards, we would officially go under the Gundam Club Australia collective when we did the big move from forums to Facebook social media, where drama occurred between moderators and smaller players that are no longer involved in the community for years to decades to come, and Hobbyco attempted to consolidate everything officially through Gunpla Builders Australia, which through infighting of influencers has recently gone silent and went through a management changeover in the 2020s.
Haven't been here for a little while. There's the water bottle I plan on putting it in. A little bit of sediments there. Hopefully it'll filter out when I'm extracting it. Smells really, really strong. We might not be able to get all of it out today, but let's see how well we go.
A few years have passed. I have 2 YouTube channels and wish to expand. With a lot of free time with only part-time work, I attempted alcohol brewing as a second channel idea.
While we're waiting, I'll give a bit of a backstory. I started it last year around the 3rd.
I'm a bit of a drinking enthusiast and definitely love regional spirits, fortified wines, natural wines, anything from rice to grain, and attempted a African blend of banana wine, which I was unable to purchase, and only concluded that getting a sample of it I would have to make it myself, not knowing that it's a fairly bitter, complex and unusual choice of drink.
We are done. We got an almost full bottle there. Bringing it back. It's a pale yellow. Let's give it a shot. Whoa, it's rough. Not bad though. A little flavouring and a little sugar. It'll be awesome.
Definitely enjoy eating out, travelling, and especially cooking. I've got quite a few recipes under the belt, including family inherited traditional recipes and meals. I've tried to make a lot of that on the second channel, PhD Manchild, with some level of success. This section is covering a collection of repaired toys, starting from very early on in the piece, mostly 2012 and going on. The first toy here of the two-heart figure doing a flying kick was the first figure I bought at an anime convention, and after a long time it fell off the shelf and snapped in half. This wasn't a big deal as the peg was pinned on with a pin vise filled with putty and superglued. This made it removable so it would not break again. With the great ease of that repair and showing off to my friends, I was presented with more figures, some from anime stores that I would frequent to repair to be sold on to customers, or customers brought in as returns for a little money or major discounts, to things that my friends had and they were threatening to throw out or been sitting on for a while due to rarity. Later on, with this Fate Zero Rider model, this started getting a bit more complex and was utilizing more experimental and exciting modeling practices. This one by filing down the connecting points of the chariot and the bulls, making a little bit of an insert and gluing in a rare earth magnet. This was more involved than what I traditionally do with toy repairing, though this one was for a very dear friend who thoroughly enjoyed this character and toy a good 10 years ago from now. It's still on display, and it's fantastic that it can be separatable for storage and transport. This last one is one of the more expensive toys when I've gotten far more comfortable in repairing them, and it's starting to get into the $200-300 realm, and I've even since then repaired toys that are far more expensive in polystone and other mediums including resin. This was also just a simple glue job, and almost all models is either putting in a pin or outright gluing it together. Most fear it, and I considered making a video tutorial covering all these experiences, but they just were not exciting enough when you're working with GK and complex model kits. Rolling into 2013, being a member of clubs and organisations that are sponsored and an ambassador of official kits like Bandai and whatnot, I was very staunch in the anti-bootleg debate and argument, collecting information for another video that it never really came together, and what was already posted has been said. My stance has changed since, and I'm not really that fussed to the point where I'm happy to build, display and even sell these products. Still around the early 2010s, top 10 videos were quite popular, from general topics in history all the way to modelling and Gunpla top 10 master grades of a particular year, best kits to build, best liners and whatnot. Flirted with the idea and research to the point where I've downloaded products on top 10 waste of money in the hobby, going down the path that I make tutorials on sourcing cheaper and alternative products of glues, thinners, paint and whatnot. Again, it just wasn't that much of an interesting video and just chasing clout, view, attention or gaming the algorithm. In the end, I just like to build what I'm naturally attracted to, and the video comes together itself via my weekly efforts and is updated or uploaded. This just sat in a file to rot for almost 10 years, and it's just interesting enough for me to pull out now. Interesting items of note is standard cheap tools relabeled to brands. It is a bit of status symbol to own. In their native countries of Germany or Japan, they're pretty cheap. Tissues, rubber gloves, Q-tips, hand wash, all pretty hilarious. These Mr. Hobby jar pourers, which funnily enough I actually bought for quite a bit. They waste a ton of paint, get dirty and leak somehow. B Club resin coloured manipulators hands, particularly for specialised kits. These would sell for 1,000 to 2,000 yen, and once shipped to your native country are starting to get to the $40, $50, $60 mark. They were all over the place in Japan, sold in hobby shops here, parallel imported, and I'd see them sit on the shelves and rot until they were sold on discount. They plagued bargain bins for a very long time and even managed to score 1 or 2 for next to nothing, but since they've all but disappeared, and I haven't really seen them anywhere except for auction sites and old photos such as this. Product of its time that's a bit of a lost media within the hobby. The equivalent of a plastic spoon to test paint and airbrush on, with texture and panel line long discontinued. I kind of wish I just got one for the joke of it. Things will start to speed up at this point with a lot less failed videos. 2014 was a big year when I got my Upper Mini 3D printer and started making content around that. And one of the first things I did was try to produce a 70-second tank, which is still kind of possible with filament printing, though resin just does it far better. This is a sandwich fail job when I just chucked a model into the slicer and let it go. I tried quite hard over the years in self-learning airbrushing, plus demonstrating what I can do and teaching it, even with the Honing Your Airbrush Skills series and constantly painting this old Airfix tank. This video covered post-shading, where you would outline the edges, panels and detail with a dark or various different colours, colour in the inner part with a much lighter colour and shade over it to get a shaded effect. We could see here that I'm doing the colour in stage, though due to having my paint far too thick with older advice on thinning paint from fine scale modelers and internet forums, it just was not quite working for me and it would be clogging and whatnot. The lines were very thick, it was very splattery, and even though it looked good on the surface here with a bit of shadowing and whatnot, it's nowhere near where my airbrushing is today. I'm just very grateful over many years of trying, failing, buying books, looking at different tutorials, researching, buying multiple airbrushes and trying as many paints as I could get my hands on and constantly experimenting. I've kind of found a style that I'm very comfortable with and able to teach. It's also extremely difficult to film airbrushing, and I'm glad I've got that down pat too. A few years after this point, when I started reviewing Chinese airbrushes, mini compressors and doing almost updating videos a month, the video would explode and go viral. This video is covering mixing your own texture paint, and I made a fatal error of utilizing bicarb baking soda over just sand or fine grit. What happens is the baking soda is an accelerant and has a chemical impact due to high alkalinity, and it affects anything from paints to resins to glues, and it sets it off a lot quicker. I was able to get a result, but it wasn't ideal, and mixing sand is better. I abandoned this and decided to refilm it at a later date as the quality was low and was very dark and wobbly.
Hello and welcome to another modelling video. This is Alan from the Mokanaman at YouTube with another modelling video. I am looking at Artista Soft. This is an air drying clay. I'm working on my Gunpla Builders World Cup diorama. It is quite massive and there's a restraint of size to fit in the storage container and weight to fly in a plane. Now, if the amount of 3D printed and components I've put in, it's very heavy. And I need a putty to work diorama to smooth out areas and have build up and whatnot. And cheaper or other putties and clays are quite heavy and adds to the weight. So I found something that's quite light that would suit the problem and thought I would review it.
I do a lot of sculpting and I play with a lot of different mediums, anything from air drying clay to part putty, wood putty, you absolutely name it. And occasionally I just buy different things for different purposes, need something light as I explained in this video for transports, and just generally a bit playful with it. I am working in a video in the far future where I'll be sampling multiple types of sculpting medium. I'll be making sausages and bowls and just cutting, sanding them and painting them.
Now what I've noticed in the tutorial I watched, the person who used this stuff was able to rub some hand cream or baby cream in his hands, and it made the putty didn't stick to his hand, so I'm going to do the same thing but for the first amount. It's sort of like a bread dough texture. It's very sticky and it's already starting to stick to my hands, and it'll actually retain its shape. Let's ram small amounts into my diorama and see what happens. So I finished applying all of it. I've got that small ball rolled up in the Glad wrap in the fridge in the cheese compartment where I keep putties and other craft related objects that ideally have a longer shelf life in the cold. And I have to say, it was like applying cream or whipped cream onto things. It just feels very soft, very light. It was just so easy to work with. Did not need to lubricate my fingers with water. It did not stick to my fingers, and it actually perfectly sticks to surfaces itself by rubbing it on. It does prefer to stick on my fingers a tad more than sticking to the surface, but that's alright with a little willpower. If you wet your fingers, you can smooth it out even further, just like things like your epoxy putty. So if I wanted this to be smoother and not have some of these fingerprints and lines or whatever, I'd wet my finger and rub it in. Though I'm going to be applying PVA glue over it, so that doesn't matter too much.
2015, I've gotten pretty comfortable with drafting in CAD and playing with my Up Mini 3D printer. May have a tiny bed, but I've been doing many small pieces to build up large dioramas. It lacked the detail and the knowledge to do more complex models, though scratch building with basic shapes, crazy diorama layouts, and gluing extra greeble or detail later on was not much of a problem at all. I wanted in between my 3D printing videos, tuning the individual machines and reviewing filament, to do a on the bench series of little projects and things that I've been up to. This one that I've cut out and not appropriate to any function was drafting up and replacing a knob for a stereo system. Humbrol Maskol. Going through the best method of masking both liquid and tape, I tested as many products as I can humanly get my hands on. Some of them I didn't even retain the footage, such as Vallejo liquid mask. That one had the least amount of tack, but it went off almost immediately for its brand of polyurethane paints. This one applied pretty well and generally has the same application qualities and drying time as any of the Mr. Hobby ones. It sprayed okay, removed fairly okay. What I didn't quite like about it was it stained white, and it did lift acrylic paint. That strange purple dye they mixed in is completely unnecessary, and otherwise this is the start of a pretty good video to edit and upload. It's just a product I'm not really into and don't want to do back-to-back videos of this product's garbage, that's product's garbage, and rather push forward stuff that works very well for my hobby. Channel's a bit of a shotgun buckshot in the amount of content and interests betrayed, and one thing I definitely love is 72nd armour from the Second World War to the Cold War. And with the collection rapidly growing on my little shelf at the old family studio, couldn't display them all, so I got this really nice aircraft tarmac material, cut them down and 3D printed some concrete supports, much like the inside of a multi-story car park. This was all printed, sanded, chopped up and painted in some interesting metallic colours, hit with a sludge wash, and all the tanks were neatly displayed on top. They were caked in dust and eventually cleaned down, but it was just a nice way of being able to have the full array of tanks on permanent display. This project was nowhere near interesting enough to make a video about, and the footage pretty much sat around, though it's generally worth mentioning that this happened in the background of the videos over the years. 2016, we have a 3 years with the airbrush and 3D printer under our belt, and the channel is doing and producing a pretty good form with models, tutorials and events coming out regularly. I really got into these mini helmets as a quick turnaround for a build and demonstration of the abilities of the 3D printer. I did a few popular anime video game designs and started looking at history like the German helmet and this interesting Chinese piece. They never really got finished as the original helmet videos didn't do too well, and I kind of lost interest looking at bigger printers to do full size scale. Detailed panel line scribing started to get popular, especially in the English speaking part of the world, and the revolutionary chisel style of scribers where you could get fatter lines and different shapes hit the market with people trying to get them. They were very expensive. I tried this alternative wave one with a rounded tip and didn't really care for how it worked. We all know pre-YouTube I made Warhammer. and later on attended a cinema by a few professional European-style wargamer and miniature painters. And this workshop focused on making bases and dioramas for a competition or commission setting, as well as talk about their life as commission modelers and how they make a living painting, building, travelling and doing shows. It was quite eye-opening with a series of small activities and then bringing in my own miniatures and telling a story by elevating it and bringing points of focus that the eye will look at from a low point to a high point. I was introduced to a few new mediums and got quite creative in sculpting and playing around of all sorts of different biomes and settings. This was hosted in the now closed store Gundam Universe in the eastern suburbs of Australia. I had no intention of making a video, but documented it for future reference in builds. Christmas 2016, and one of the last bits of content we're covering with the Mecha Workshop, we ran an event of Kris Kringle where we all exchanged as terrible model kits as we could find as a challenge build to each other. My task was this glass jar with a amazing red warrior inside, doused in hand cream or moisturizer. Already cut off the runners with its nubs. I went to work by cleaning each and individual piece Japanese style, acquiring some instructions and reverse engineering it by snapping it all together and test fitting it. This was all glued into place with basic seam lines filled and put in an arch oving position. I would download instructions how to do Japanese rope play and did a bondage scheme around it. The parts were separated and painted in a pale pastel pink and reassembled with very little weathering, no top coat, no frills at all. A bit of a joke or meme in this group of friends is I had without good reason, a heavy dislike to this mecha design, following through with the meme of the My Little Pony Kumja toy, where a toy was doused in bodily fluids and boiled on a heater. I replicated this with fake water material and PVA glue. Just one of those few lewd meme models I did, like the safety bear or the Exia curtain rod plug. It was quite amusing and everyone enjoyed it.
So we're doing some painting. I'm making this explosion sphere, which doesn't look like much now, but with more painting and fluff and whatnot, be interesting.
2017 video labelled Honing Your Airbrush Skills 22.
So what's happened is we've painted everything white. I'm going to do a bit of shading of red and orange on the tips, and tiny bits of debris is going to be...
This is for my Gunpla Builders World Cup Cubile project with heavy 3D printing components and a light up solar power ball that looked like an explosion to depict a scene from Double Zeta Gundam.
So we've got some orange on the tips of the wires. So I've done a bit more. We shaded a bit of red at the end of the wire.
The project is different and very interesting. The finished result came out quite nicely, though the recording of it is far too guerrilla, lots of shaking, far too many ums and ahs, just unnecessary updates about every colour shaded with very little airbrushing action. One of my favourite projects and customs that came out, both the model and the diorama presentation with the space cloth and the explosion with debris. Unfortunately, YouTube has changed and I've kind of lost interest in these very big competition projects after drama with the community and not being welcomed in the GBWC. I've focused on doing all my other builds at a higher quality over just doing a giant annual piece, which in retrospect is for the better. By 2017, I've entered resin 3D printing via a DLP machine, SparkMaker, the smallest, cheapest 3D printer on the market, plagued with a few issues, but with parts replacement and working, you're able to get small models out of it. And I had success from everything with little tanks all the way to wargaming figures and small helmets. Pushing the machine to its limit, I've decided to have a go at a large 1/7 scale anime figure. Found this My Hero Academia Siu Floppy figure that was made in either Blender or ZBrush by a up-and-coming sculptor. The model did have its issues while slicing with scaling and parts fitting, but it wasn't nothing that couldn't be sorted according to the comments, and there were examples of finished models. Though as I was learning this 3D printer with screens breaking down, tuning it, calibration, screen repairing and all that, I also had the trouble of sourcing resin. As resin printing was not widely adopted across Australia, there was a major shortage of the Mars or any cubic resin. And I had a go at a few other lesser known brands and even the native Australian one, and they generally did not react to UV too well, overexposing and losing all detail, or cutting out and having sections of the models just missing or pancaking due to insufficient supports. Supports and printing a model from an upside down bread was also a completely different learning curve altogether. I shared most of my failures, but I tried to make this one work. This build was abandoned.
Hello and welcome to another modelling video. This is Alan from another modelling video, a 3D printing one. And we're returning to our old Up Mini. Now, before we abandoned this, it had problems with the heat bed.
As an early generation reliable 3D printer, the Up Mini has served me well and was an amazing teaching tool to get my feet wet in 3D printing at a price that I could definitely afford. Sadly, as anything with mechanical parts and heating elements, the bed died. With the discontinuation of this 3D printer and the manufacturer moving on, there was just simply no aftermarket parts or even parts to replace it. There was all sorts of options of improved beds as it had issues, and I found this heating pad wired up but decided not to use the printer. Traditionally, when I would do an event such as Manifest and later on Animanga hosting a model workshop and competition, me and whoever would be in attendance, volunteers, attendees, would try to do a weekend build over the 2-3 days we were on site. And with my love and enjoyment of Mecha Musume, it was very easy and quick to chop up an anime figure and start applying parts or loose Gundam legs and paint it up in a scheme that would predict a lot of the line art and work out there. A couple of them has not worked out over the years, and I have one or two that are a gashapon size, though this year it wasn't a very necessarily good year, as it was the first that I ran an event independently, and tried to make this figure work with a more complex artillery kit and diesel punk post World War I German look. The more I added to it and cluttered it up, the more it didn't feel right, and just eventually abandoned it. In the same breath, when I was working the Up Mini 3D printer, I did do a few designs for legs that would be friendly to print on a filament printer and add to 1/7 figures. They were very cool, depicting World War II tanks like the KV-2, though this was also abandoned as resin will do a better job. Mecha Musume is anthropomorphized anime girls attached to hardware equipment, mostly military and in a historical sense. It has a very tiny community and fan base, with a few models and spreading out into things like the Bitsushinki toy line, frame arm girls. As much fun as I had with these in the past, my audience has never really gelled to it, and since I have lost interest and haven't made any for a while. Between 2018 and 2019, I was going through some personal issues, working full-time for the first time, and trying to undergo all of my various projects plus this YouTube channel, I felt that I still needed to keep up with a weekly upload schedule and went down the path of burning out. This Femina kit was one of the start of the ed thinking I could do a really quick, cute turnover and be a bit fancy and change the colour scheme from this weird pastel yellow lime green to her standard colour scheme that she depicts on her sporting outfit. And in the end, this isn't actually a very good kit. It looks cute snapped together. It's very toy-like, though unless you're going very spectacular or fancy or metallic on the scheme, there's not much you can do, and it absolutely killed my self-esteem. Once painted, I took a photo of it and just chucked it aside, not even considering turning this into a video, and came to grips with myself that during 2020-2021, as I moved house, not modelling and not producing bad models was okay, and just not posted for about 6 months.
Good afternoon, guys. My name is Alan. I'm a modeller who plays around on my kind of bid ideas, videos, YouTube channel, as well as build models for myself and sell models to people. So I've got a...
The 2019 Model Expo was a pretty big deal for me, where I unrevealed the salt mines in a full retail capacity, plus doing a talk on 3D printing in a panel located here. Sadly, the audio is absolutely horrendous and is not playbackable at all. I pretty much cover methods of sourcing 3D models and the way to utilize it in your modeling. The most advantages being that you can draft or draw anything 2D and extruding it into 3D, or sourcing models and calculating it and scaling it to the size that you need to suitably be posed with machinery, aircraft, tanks in a diorama setting or on the model itself. And for the majority of people who do not want to actually own and deal with the maintenance and operation of a 3D printer in how to source prints by commissioning or approaching companies, businesses or specialized stores that do the printing for you. And if you wish to prepare the model or pay someone to prepare the model or even draft it on your behalf, plus the processing of your model, do you need to sand it, wash it, prime it, paint it, across filament printing and resin printing. Very little of the talk was about the actual operating or purchasing of a 3D printer, but the majority I spoke about at this event is mostly covered in my various 3D printing videos, mostly on scaling or drafting it in Fusion 360 using Mesh Mixer and all those other software packages. After this, a handful of small events and animanga which wasn't really well documented. There will be no further events during 2020-2021. 2020, the pandemic hit. I hit a very big mental breakdown and work issues, followed by an immediate cease of all work and lockdown within my home, the new property that I purchased. The footage here is a failed application of a laser cut stencil. Hello and welcome to another modelling video. This is Alan from the Mokanaman at YouTube with another model video. Today a quick one on 3D printing, especially pausing your prints as well as bed adhesion when you print. Just because there's a button when you can press pause to hold it for a few seconds to adjust or a few hours to let it cool down and print at a later date does not mean that it's possible for your print to survive the pause. We're going to cover a few steps and a few tips that I've come across over the years, especially now with a much larger bed, the Ender 5 Plus. I was able to take stock and reassess where I was going, what I was doing, what I wanted to do to be happy and in the way of a career path. Now, the field of work I've always been at has been fairly flexible, where I was able to dance between part-time, full-time for very short periods of time at a seasonal capacity, and casual, where I was able to do freelance work within my industry and move around to make as much or as little money as I could. I'll take a massive amount of time off from 4 to 5 day weekends and focusing my work attention where it was most profitable. This allowed me with enough money to survive or thrive to the point where I could travel, invest in my hobby, and almost do whatever I wish to do, including volunteering at events. By 2019, I was stood down from that and required to go absolute full-time at one of my jobs, being forced to quit my side job at a university that allowed me access to all sorts of resources in 3D printing, engineering and software. I wasn't doing too well at the time, and unfortunately with internalized drama as the Australian Gunpla community was collapsing and some strange activity overseas, I kind of gotten a series of takedown notices and harassment from a publication, and ceased making videos for a period of time, flirting with the idea if I wanted to quit YouTubing and the hobby altogether or take a plunge and go semi-professional. I took a break for 4 to 6 months and it didn't work out too well, was not that overly happy at work, then threw myself completely in setting up my new property and being a hobby shop and taking on as much commission work as possible while working 0.7 to part-time in my industry. This is where I found my really happy midpoint, where I was able to sustain myself quite comfortably and flirt around the hobby in a way that was very comfortable without being forced in selling or making enough models to make ends meet. Being able to go to work for a limited amount of time and then forced home for weeks to months due to the pandemic and national lockdowns gave me the chance to set up the salt mine hobby shop, reevaluate and set up the workshop exactly how I would enjoy using it, and with a bunch of money saved up, purchased a whole heap of equipment including larger 3D printers, which I spent a fair amount of time setting up, learning and calibrating, plus 3D scanners and other bits and pieces. Once I was able to fling open my doors, everything was received very well by my follower and customer base built up through years of making videos and integrating with the community, plus selling at events and being a point of customer service. The video in the background is covering very large 3D prints in cleaning your bed, building adhesion with hairspray, and being able to pause your 3D prints. Due to the nature of your prints expanding and subtracting when it cools down and popping off your bed, a bit of adhesion makes sure it sits there nicely. I've got a BL touch to make sure it's level, to put a nice flat first layer, though it doesn't hurt to adjust the bolts slightly by having even closer contact. I'm using a feeler gauge to get the calibration absolutely right when leveling the bed. When you do pause a print, it does change shape, and when it resumes printing, an artifact line is left behind. If you're a bit strategic or you're doing very large prints where there's large surfaces of lack of detail, you're able to get away with it easily. Though some of the very large prints I've been doing has been going over a few days to a week, and when I'm leaving the house to go to work or do something, it's not quite appropriate to leaving it to run in the background, as it is a bit of a fire hazard. With little tips like that, it's not necessarily to put all this in its own video, where my next large 3D print will be exploring these topics.
Next is preheating the bed and keeping the bed nice and hot for a while to build up and resonate heat. If you suddenly heat it when it's cold, it's not going to be consistently hot, and we want the plastic to be molten and really embed with the surface. And I know bed leveling takes forever, it's annoying, it's one of the most painful parts of the hobby. The more you do it, the better you get at it, even if you've got a BT touch.
You will get faster at it. It will get easier. You'll find the telltale signs and get better tools for it. Don't bother doing it with paper. In short, there's a good chance your prints will split. This can just be glued back together. Please don't get me wrong, I'm not fishing for sympathy or anything. It's just a bit of a story and background of where I've come from and where I'm going over the past few years, and some aspects that I didn't feel that was quite appropriate to bring to the forefront of the channel and standard content. I can say for sure now I'm a lot happier, and I'm grateful and glad a lot of you guys, especially the long-term crew, has stuck around for the whole time. This is a 1/35th diorama on top of a Pringles can depicting an 88 German anti-aircraft gun from World War II. It was a bit ambitious and was meant to be my first airbrush achievement. It never came to fruition, and over the years got damaged and missing parts. I just bagged it up and sold it as junk. Also at this stage, I did not expect to get this deep and vulnerable, opening myself up for a video like this. During the pandemic, I've been sorting through all my files, re-uploading things, evaluating where my channel is, and just doing a spring clean of all the files and projects I'm working on, what I intend to abandon, and put together a box of all of the incomplete projects, and shall finish these models before attempting new ones. For all of these failed projects and lost content, the lost content has been uploaded now. It would have been interesting to do a compilation, and it has become a lot bigger than what I've pretty much expected it. We're definitely getting into rambly territories, and I'm totally burning out in editing this monstrosity of mixed data, mixed files, and unorganized chaos, which I've revisited multiple times and archived it and sorted it in files neater and neater as I went. I'm grateful it's all edited. I'm definitely not going to get any reward back for this effort, but for any of you who've watched it to the very end, please let us know that if you've enjoyed this, or if it's been a very interesting, raw or whatnot video put out. It's definitely a bit of an insight that I've never intended to expose, and may never do so again.
Starting to get sick of cleaning out these aluminium molds every time. Again, the lumpy resin hasn't really set it properly. It's sticky and soft and weird, yet on the other end it's beautifully hard. And the milli part this time is a lot harder. It is really, really nice, though two humongous chunks came out of it.
This is the last of my life's work out of the archive. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, until next time, stay tuned for further content. I sincerely hope that this was a very interesting insight. I do want to make a comment about the injection molding project, which this video didn't even make it to light, as it's just another failed experiment. It will be revisited sooner rather than later.